Howdy, folks. Welcome to the last of our Building Equitable Economies series here at California Forward. Really excited about this one today because it pulls together all the different threads that we've been talking about over the course of the past couple of months. Obviously, broadband is important, workforce development is important, managing our forests is important, all these different pieces that are important for so many of the diverse regions of our state. And what we need to add to this, right? It's been an interesting time. Billions for this, billions for that. How many billions do we have? And a lot of these investments are essential and important. And we and our partners through the California Economic Summit have been advocating for them for many years. Really excited about that. But the plan for an equitable economic recovery still needs a plan for an equitable economic recovery. Which goes beyond the increasing of funding for housing and homelessness to really look at what kinds of jobs are there in our different regions. How do they really provide livelihoods for the people who live there so that people can thrive, have economic mobility, so that we can achieve racial equity, so that we can grow the middle class. And that's what we are talking about today. Next slide, Lauren. Again, hi, that's me, Michael Weinberg, CEO of California Forward. Next slide, please. Webinar's being recorded. Speakers, please keep your mics on mute. And the important thing here is we've got a Q&A panel over to the right side of your screen. So if you pose those questions, we will then pose them to our exciting panelists today. Next slide. All right, so just really quickly, we here at California Forward really work on developing what we call an ecosystem of equity, starting with the California Dream Index and the evidence there, really rooting ourselves in communities, coming together as a part of the California Economic Summit to address the state's most pressing challenges, and then taking the lead on some of these issues through our California Forward Action Fund, our C4. And we do all of this in partnership. We do this in partnership with the folks you'll be hearing on the webinar today, and so many of you participating. So thank you so much again for joining us. Next slide. All right, so just one thing to kind of set the table, and that is through the California Dream Index, we look at a number of different factors affecting the lives, livelihoods, and economic mobility of Californians. We look at housing affordability, we look at access to clean air and drinking water. And one of the things that we look at is how many people live in what we call prosperous neighborhoods. So these are neighborhoods with less than 20% of poverty. And looking at this between 2010 and 2019, shockingly, during this period of economic growth, during this so-called recovery from the Great Recession, in the state generally, we actually ended up with fewer people living in these prosperous neighborhoods. Now, there were some exceptions to that. There was a slight increase in people living in prosperous neighborhoods in Los Angeles that you'll see here. But one of the things that we've really, pointed out and focused on in California is the difference between coastal California and inland California. And when you look at Sacramento, when you look at the Shasta Cascades in northern Central California, or when you look at the Central Valley, actually during this period of enormous generation of wealth, a lot of people in the state fell behind. So that's what we're really anchoring ourselves in. How do we get different outcomes for the family, for the people of the state? How do we achieve racial equity? How do we achieve economic and geographic equity? And so that's what we are all about today. Next slide. Okay, so today we're focusing on equitable economic recovery, and we are just absolutely delighted to have Assemblymember Rudy Salas has been carrying a piece of legislation for our broader network, AB 106 this year, that will make sure that, again, our plan for an equitable economic recovery actually includes a plan for an equitable economic recovery, right? In addition to all these vital investments that we're making. So Assemblymember Salas, thank you so much for being a champion for these issues. Thank you so much for being here with us today. And, let us know, what are you thinking about all these issues that our audience needs to know about?
Well, thank you. I appreciate that, and thank you for having me. Micah, you've been great. California Forward has been great, right, for providing the platform just to talk about the importance of equitable economic recovery and the future of economic development in California. I want to thank everybody for being here today. As we discussed AB 106, and it is an innovative framework to promote regional collaboration and bring new investment dollars to underserved parts of our state. AB 106 establishes the Regions Rise grant program within the Governor's Office of Planning and Research, which will enable regions to collaborate and create inclusive regional strategies for economic prosperity. Kind of what you were saying, we need a plan. But for years, California struggled with, income inequality that we've seen throughout the state, especially in like the Central Valley, Inland Empire, basically any of the non-urban centers throughout the entire state. When we looked at some of the statistics, I mean, even back in 2018, the bottom fifth of California households saw their average income shrink by more than 5%. Even before the COVID-19 pandemic, while California touted a statewide unemployment of less than 4%, we saw in a lot of these areas in inland California, there was unemployment rates that were closer to 10% and in some places closer to 15%. This inequality is only worsened during the pandemic, right? Job losses have been felt strongest by low-income workers who disproportionately live in, I call it, non-urban centers or inland California. Since 2020, unemployment rates have ranged from 25 to 30% for families making less than $30,000. So if you make less than $30,000, the unemployment rates are 25 to 30%. And you compare that to people that are to families that are making over 150,000, and that percentage is only 5 to 10%. We know that around 15% of African American and Latino households report not having enough food. We saw that in the food lines, especially during this last year during the pandemic. Businesses that were struggling before the pandemic have now closed, and many others are holding on to state and federal aid to keep them afloat. In the wake of the pandemic, California is going to need, sound investment strategies that will not only help rebuild our economies, but make them more resilient for future financial disasters. AB 106 drives our communities together to create innovative solutions to tackle the barriers that prevent inland Californian from experiencing the health and prosperity of our Golden State. Those programs, they're diverse, right? They're public-private partnerships to help organize just to face the challenges that we're all facing, because it doesn't matter what community you're in, you're still dealing with the problems of inequality, the problems of pollution, the problems of unemployment, everything that comes along with that. So we have challenges before us and we have hurdles before us, but it's not unattainable and it's not something that we can't accomplish together. So what I want to say is this bill is going to basically give our locals, which know our regions the best, the resources and tools they need to help make the community a lot more prosperous to deal with and tackle these issues. We're requiring the regional collectives that come together to take advantage of AB 106's program to have a diverse makeup of business owners, nonprofits, education stakeholders, labor, disadvantaged community residents, because we know we're all in this together, and we know that the only way to get past these barriers is by doing it together. So today, I know you guys are going to hear about some of the great successes occurring across the state, such as Fresno's Drive Initiative. We want to encourage more local leaders to come together to address their most pressing challenges. The Fresno Drive Initiative has already attracted millions of dollars of investment that have been given out as grants to support thousands of new jobs and hundreds of small businesses owned by women and people of color. I know out in the southern end, the Better Bakersfield and Boundless Kern, or B3K, is also here with us today. Their work in creating a plan for Kern's long-term prosperity and quality job creation is exactly the kind of work that AB 106 will help fund with access to this capital. The High Road Training Partnership also showcases the kind of high-skilled, high-wage job opportunities that can be created when state dollars are combined with local partnerships to invest in innovation and quality products. Especially as the state focuses on just transitions from things like fossil fuel reliant jobs towards green energy. We have to make sure that the families are still able to support their own families and that they have jobs that actually support them and their households. We know this model works. And not only will AB 106 help revitalize economies, but it'll also make those economies more inclusive and more equitable. So I gotta make sure I put a pitch in before I have to get going. But I want to make sure that for the folks on the call, we could use your help in asking the governor's office to include funding for AB 106 so that we can have this regional collaboration. And we're asking for $15 million. And if you could ask the governor to include that in this May revise, which is coming out this Friday, we'd be really appreciative of that. And so I just want to say, Micah, to you and your team, you guys have been fantastic in helping us shepherd this entire thing. I know Mr. Tubbs is on and a number of others that have actually helped push this as the solution. Like you said, having that plan, right? Figure it out, because we've been hearing all week, billions for this, billions for that. And, he came out with another 1.5 billion for small businesses this morning, but we need to have that plan in place so that we allow the locals the ability and the resources to tackle a lot of these big issues. So thank you for having me this morning.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for being here, and thank you so much for championing this issue, and thank you for emphasizing the partnership that is necessary. I think a lot of people, if we just got government out of the way, or if we just dealt with corporations, then everything would be fine, when actually all these actors are important pieces of charting a better path in the state. So thank you so much for your leadership. Really appreciate your being here today.
Thank you, Micah.
All right. Our next speaker, certainly a classic, needs no introduction type speaker. Michael Tubbs was the mayor of Stockton and is now the special advisor to the governor for economic mobility and opportunity. And not a lot of people who were mayor just as they're getting started, right? And so really excited to about your leadership on universal basic income, which is like nationwide, if not worldwide, and everything that you've been doing. And just really appreciate your being here today. And let us know what you think we should be doing here for equitable economic recovery. From your vantage point, up to 99. We started down in Kern County, and now we're up in San Joaquin. So let us know what you think makes sense here.
Absolutely. And first, Mike, I just want to thank you for your leadership, the entire team at Cal Forward, for doing the messy work of convening and meeting and emailing and sort of getting things on paper and ideas on paper and having to respond to something that's real intangible, because it's so easy to be talk and say we should do, but to actually get different people to do it and to do it in a way that's iterative, it's very difficult. So I want to just let you all know I see and appreciate that. Really, and to the assemblyman, who I'm sure is off now being an assemblyman, but for his leadership and really ensuring that the state thinks about sort of how money is necessary but not sufficient, and that we have to be targeted and we have to be intentional with what we do in terms of an equitable recovery. And because I know we have time for Q&A, so I'll start with this radical notion I discovered as mayor of the city of Stockton. And the radical notion is this, that when we talk about government, we're talking about people. We're talking about you and me. And when we talk about the economy, we talk about people. We talk about you and me. And the issues we see in government, the issues we see in the economy are reflective in issues we have in society, particularly around this notion of a hierarchy of human value. When we talk about equitable recovery, we know without any data, without any research, everyone on this call could probably say which groups were disproportionately impacted by COVID-19, which regions were disproportionately impacted by COVID-19, which groups are disproportionately poor, which groups were disproportionately further harmed economically by COVID-19. It takes no great mystery, no real thought. And I think for us, that's the challenge. How do we take this opportunity, these billions of dollars are coming in, but do so in a way where our behavior changes in terms of what we expect from institutions and what our institutions and what we do collectively. We've heard this week, and you'll hear a lot more things on Friday that you will like, things that are targeted to regions, things that are about sort of Central Valley and Inland California. But we heard sort of announcements that shows that the governor understands the frame of investing in people, from the Golden State Stimulus 2 for every Californian making 75K or below, even our undocumented Californians, to the $2 billion announced yesterday in childhood savings accounts for 3.5 million low-income children in California, to $3 billion to community schools, to ensuring that our students arrive on campus have access to counselors, to nurses, et cetera. And we know that state government can only do so much, but it's going to be up to the local districts, the local counties, the local mayors and city councils, the local CBOs to actually implement said intent and said desire. And that's why I'm so excited by this conversation today, because we need you all to do what you've been doing and to think very, again, my favorite word today is intentional. Think very intentionally about how do we use these resources to target specific issues. And I believe in the radical notion that if there's anything, like I don't think government can do everything, but I do think that's not an excuse for government to do nothing. And I do think at the very least, government has to redress with specific and intentional policies, specific and intentional harms done to certain communities. We know we have a wealth gap between races and an income gap between races, not because it's God ordained, but because there's been government policies, from our land use policies to redlining policies to education funding policies that have created the reality that we deal with and we're trying to make more equitable. And again, that's not just going to happen by wishing well. It's going to take intentional action and targeted towards harms and targeted specifically for communities that harm, because that's the only way a rising tide will lift all boats, is we have to make sure everyone has a boat. If someone's boat is leaking, we can't, and someone's boat is not, we should probably plug up the leaking boat first, so then every boat can rise. And I also say, just from the past 4 years as mayor and doing piloting sort of guaranteed income at a local level, and now having 50 mayors across this country doing it, speaking with governments in the UK and other places, just how important the locals are, just how important the people on the ground are to influencing this national conversation. So as a pseudo member of state government, I would say very clearly that we need you. We need your ideas. We need you to implement. We need you to do. We need you to sort of take these intentions, take these investments, historic investments, and make them work. But also make sure when we talk about equity that communities are impacted aren't just receiving services or aren't just being planned for, but they're planning with. And again, that's easier said than done. But I spent 8 years doing it as a council person, as a mayor. And so much of the things we did in Stockton, from the guaranteed income to the scholarship program to the gun violence reduction programs, were better when we took the time to engage the people most impacted, engage the people who actually use the services, engage the people who are actually affected in the actual leadership process, driving decisions and helping inform our thinking about what's actually needed, what's actually necessary, and what's actually real. And we also know that when we talk about an equitable recovery, that's not a one meeting, 1 year, one funding stream, one pandemic proposition. We are committed to this work for the long haul. We have to be committed to iterate. We're not going to get it right the first time. And we really have to commit ourselves to not be afraid to try new things, to not be afraid to push our own thinking, to not be afraid to challenge our own preconceived notion. As I would tell my community groups when I was mayor, and I tell it now, clearly we don't know everything because things are still broken. Clearly something's not, clearly we don't have all the knowledge. So let's be like Brene Brown said, and let's commit ourselves to getting it right versus being right. Let's commit ourselves to being as curious as my 18-month-old in discovering what it is we think we know about the economy. What is it that we think we know to a solution, and orient ourselves to being problem solvers. And if we do that, we'll stumble across solutions that are known and that are unknown, that are regional and that can scale statewide. And that's exactly what we did, particularly with the basic income program in Stockton. So I'll conclude with saying that this is probably one of the most exciting times, I would argue, for this type of work, because now we can't complain about resources, right? Before we could just say we don't have the resources. We don't have the resources. No. We have billions of dollars in resources. So now it's really on us. It's like I said, money is necessary but not sufficient. But what's sufficient, or what makes that proposition sufficient, is each and every one of us rolling our sleeves, being data informed, being inclusive in terms of the governance and decision-making structures, and doing what we can to build societies, communities, regions that are truly golden for all. So I'm your partner in this work. I'm happy to roll up my sleeves and help, and I'm excited and inspired by what you guys have already done. And I'm more than looking forward to what you all will do collectively, individually, as we build a California that's truly for all.
Awesome. Thanks, Michael. Inspiring message, and I appreciate your grounding it in the broader, almost spiritual context, right, of committing to getting it right, not being right. And Brene Brown, my wife has me watch a lot of her on YouTube. But a few questions coming in here, and one from a fellow who knows a little bit about advising the governor on economics, Lenny Mendonça. So maybe tell us a little bit more about, obviously, Governor Newsom and, his administration know a lot about economic opportunity, or committed to it. What are you sort of specifically committed to making sure that they know? Like what specific messages are you delivering that you think probably expands their frame of what's going on here?
I really think, because Lenny did so much groundwork on this, right? So I'm really just not doing a great job of walking in Lenny's footsteps, but really, I just try to first ground us in values and just remind people in terms of when we do this work, we do it with an understanding that people aren't the problem. Like, there's no deficit in the people we serve. Right. There's no deficit in people on the underbelly of this economy. So our solutions can't be focused on what they lack. And we should really focus on what we control, which is policy, funding, priorities, et cetera. And then part of my work on the ARP specifically, spent a lot of time thinking about some stuff that's going to come out tomorrow around kind of youth development, like how to get young people engaged in the economy with meaningful experiences. Work around kind of local experimentation, how do we support local municipalities experimenting? Work around sort of investments in the future, so spend a lot of time on the child savings account proposal that was released yesterday. Not sure where we landed on this, but a lot of work around sort of, I'm a nerd, so I just literally go on Twitter and read smart people. So Insight had this amazing study, and Cal Matters, the whole series about kind of our fines and fees structure, right, particularly around child support, traffic bills, et cetera, and how those are keys to keeping people in poverty. So looking at sort of with some of this money, how do we kind of alleviate those stressors and those pressures? And then also thinking, as a Stocktonian, thinking about, okay, what can we really do to help inland California in terms of not just resources, but technical assistance teams, very tactical. How do we do that? Yeah. Working with Kate Gordon on just transition stuff. So her team's doing a great job in leading it. And I'm just a kind of voice as a local. This is what would be helpful. This wouldn't be helpful. Yeah, and then I think post this, I'm going to be even more laser focused on kind of using and pushing the administration. Not that they need to be pushed, but I like pushing, so push even further around how do we not just end child poverty, but I just don't think California should have poverty. Right. It's an audacious goal, ambitious goal, but I mean, why not? So I'll be pushing a lot around sort of how do we end poverty in California, and I think the investments we're seeing today are reflective of sort of launch pads for that wider work, and then supporting Go Biz on all types of stuff.
That's great, we've got the resources. They're just not distributed. We've got plenty of resources here. I want to ask another question. That gets kind of technical, right? You mentioned like the nerdiness of this, and one of the things we really have to do is bring actual people into actual dialogue with the powerful. Whether those powerful are CEOs or political leaders, right, or leaders of regional agencies, or kind of the stakeholders that run things, in order to co-create a better future, right? Which is genuinely a partnership. Like, we talk a lot about empowerment, but actually in a lot of these processes, we've started using the word like co-powerment. How do you do that? You don't do it in a public meeting where like people come and complain about some plan they had no input into. How have you found as a mayor, as a civic leader, how you bring people into genuine dialogue to co-create a better future together.
Yeah, I think part of it is coming to grips with the fact that that dialogue is an ongoing one.
Right.
And it's one that's rooted in relationship, or preferably one that starts before there needs to be a dialogue about an issue or problem. But that's not like end all be all. But so when I was a council member, we started sort of a collective impact table called the Reinvent South Stockton Coalition that just met every month, just in the habit of talking to each other, meeting. And that was just instructive for me as a council person, because these were like not city staff people, they were just community leaders, community CBO leaders, but also residents, just regular folks who I knew there was a touch point every month at least for me to have real input. So I think providing those avenues in season and out of season, we know on this date at this time there's an opportunity to engage. So I think as that muscle gets built, then it becomes regular and routine and part of like how I do work and how I do work better. So that was super helpful. And then as a council person, what we did before COVID, which made it a little bit more difficult, we would have resident summits. So every year I would have a resident summit where we have hundreds of residents come, give input. And that was just not necessarily a dialogue, but also another touch point for people to engage. And I would also say, I think, particularly for those who are in charge of institutions, the onus is really on you, because the folks who we need to speak to are like busy and they don't get paid to do the work that we do. Like,
right.
We get paid to do this work, they don't. So it's finding ways to engage with folks where they are, or finding credible community members who are in conversations with them and ask them, can you convene 3 of your folks for me to talk to? But I think my favorite word today, I think it's about being intentional. And if it is something that's important and something that it's valued, then I think there's a variety of ways to do it. And then there's also sort of structural things with governance, et cetera. But I mean, I would find my pastors. I'm not Latino, so for my Latino community, was very intentional about establishing relationships with particular leaders there and service providers, and that all sort of helped kind of influence my thinking about the city and how to do things. And it also made those boring meetings bearable, because I had images in my head of the people I was helping. Because those meetings could be like, sometimes.
Yeah. So I think this is sort of a follow-up question from Courtney Riley. Like, how do you get people out of their silos, right? I mean, so we talked a little bit about community engaging with, these decision makers, but so many of the decision makers are kind of just really narrowly focused on whatever it is they've got going on. How do you get the sort of, these leaders of the community you're talking about engaging with to get out of their silos or out of their comfort zones and really work for change?
The hardest thing to do was to get all my nonprofits to play together. And I didn't know, because I was even younger than I was on city council. So I was like, we should all work together. But I didn't know there was like years and decades of bad blood and personality conflicts and competition for grants. So I think part of it is whoever's convening sort of just being transparent about that. Like, I know this is different. I know this is scary. I know oftentimes you guys compete with each other. You guys might even like each other. But we all are unified around these 3 things. And in the case of Stockton, it's like we are all committed to moving South Stockton forward. And we also had a conversation about funding. Like, this effort is not going to compete with existing funding streams, et cetera. But in fact, this effort will allow you to bring new funders in, so you'll get more money. And that seems to really, but I think it really just took, and then I would do like relationship counseling. So I was always doing one-on-ones between the meetings to make sure everyone's okay. And I think it's finding some wins and ways to bring community. And I think over time, even if folks aren't friends, they're at least used to being in meetings together. And now when outside people come in, they know how to act. It's like they look, everyone's like best friends, right? Despite like, and actually the relationships have reset, because in this time of convening, we found ways for folks to stack and partner and they never thought so before. So I mean, to answer your question concretely, you just have to force it and find things that make a lot of sense to work together, and hopefully have a little bit of a carrot, which is usually some level of funding to get folks to work together and do it. It's like a muscle. So you do it and do it until it becomes like, but you can't get tired of it too, because it's hard. And you have to make time, because I think a lot of siloing is that people are busy with their emails, with their boss, with their life. So if it's not integrated into their existing work stream, if it becomes like a separate thing that takes effort, that's not automatic, then becomes people will revert back to the silo. Like, I get paid to do this, I'm responsible for this, I'm accountable for this. But if there's a way to integrate into work streams, like, no, I'm being evaluated for it. So what what I did when I was on council, I talked to we had all the CBO leadership. And then we also had their deputies. So I talked to the leadership about, okay, how do you make sure their deputies, this is part of their deliverables. This is part of what we evaluate them on. And then the same thing with kind of the city staff that are part of it. I said, well, how do we work this into your work plan? Like
Exactly.
part of you're evaluated on is how is being part of this convening. And that helped a lot as well, because then people knew it was part of their job now. It wasn't something extra. It was no additional job.
I love that, and I think that's a good thing to close on, which is like equity can't be an add-on. It can't be you can't moonlight, right? Like, oh well, I did all this stuff 9 to 5, but now I'm going to go to one meeting to talk about equity. I love that, putting it into people's work plans, and so thank you so much for doing the messy work and hard work, the intentional work in your position as mayor, what you're doing right now for the state, and everything going forward. And just so grateful for your partnership and having you here today.
No, anytime. And if I can help, please let me know.
All right. We will let you know. All right.
Sure
well, I'm going to hand it over to my colleague, Ish Herrera, who is our Director of Regional Stewardship. And so responsible for all the messy, hard, and intentional work going on in the regions around the state. Ish, over to you, man.
All right, thank you, Micah, and thank you, Michael, for those great comments. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm live here from Western Fresno County, so right back down the 99, and we're going to stay here for the next 40 minutes. I have the pleasure of welcoming 4 leaders who are leading the work that Assemblymember Salas described in his comments. These efforts are already underway in 4 regions that we're going to learn about today. With me here today, and I want to welcome then panelists, if you can turn your cameras on and leave them on throughout the duration of our panel, that would be great. I want to welcome Nick Ortiz, who's here from Kern County. He'll be talking about the B3K effort and tell us what B3K means. We have Michelle Decker from the Inland Empire here to speak about IEGO. We have Ashley Swearingen, who's here to talk to us about Fresno Drive, which we heard about earlier. And then last but not least, we have our friend Tim McManus, who is here to talk about the great work going on in the Salinas Valley. Welcome, everybody, to this conversation. And really, this is meant to be a conversation. We talked about the AB 106 earlier. What you all are going to share with us here today really is the nuts and bolts of what AB 106 is aiming to support with additional resources and additional state support. So I really am looking forward to the comments that you all have to share here today about how this work is taking place in the trenches, in the communities, on the ground with your leadership and the support and contributions of many that are working alongside of you. So let's kick this off. We'll take a minute or two for each of these questions, and I want to make sure we get around to all of you for your input. But let's start with this first one. If you can all take a minute or two to just tell us a little bit and describe what the inclusive economic development process looks like in your region, and what its intended outcomes are, and what you hope they become. Let's start with let's go with Nick. Go down the 99 to Kern.
Perfect. Well, thank you, Ish, and thanks to the California Forward team for inviting us to be on this, and really appreciate and inspired by not just the work that California Forward does, but the work that we've seen in the regions with my fellow panelists. That's the great thing about this work, is that we get inspired and we learn from other regions that are doing great things. We can incorporate those lessons learned into our region. So I'm the CEO of the Greater Bakersfield Chamber, and B3K, or A Better Bakersfield and Boundless Kern, is our inclusive regional economic development planning process. This was kind of conceived at the end of 2019. And, our effort is really born out of kind of 2 things: a recognition that our region, as, many parts of the San Joaquin Valley and inland California, faces some inequitable outcomes when it comes to health, when it comes to education, when it comes to poverty, a range of things. At the same time, trying to move the needle on those inequities is becoming harder because the main industries that really power our economy down here, agriculture and oil and gas production, are facing sustained market and regulatory headwinds. So what we're trying to do here is create a process and create a strategy and investment plan with a relentless focus on growing quality jobs for the region, and in a way that builds on our strengths. And then in terms of how we kind of tie into what's happening on a statewide level, you know, climate change is real, but the climate policy, the actual interventions, is having a disproportionate impact on our region. And so B3K is one of the ways that our region can kind of help the state vision from the energy capital of California. We produce the most oil, we produce the most renewable energy. How we get to that net zero future, that maybe negative net negative carbon intensity or greenhouse gas energy future, where it is really driven by innovations coming out of these regions, and it's growing opportunity and closing equity gaps.
Great, thank you, Nick. Let's turn over to Ashley. Ashley, Fresno Drive has been cited often as, you know, being one of the early adopters of these efforts, and has really served as a template for other regions to consider when they're getting ready to launch their own work. Tell us a little bit about Fresno Drive and how it came to be, and what some of the intended outcomes are. And I think we have you on mute, Ashley. Try to see if we can get you to. All right, try that again. All right, bear with us here.
You are correct. I was on mute.
There we go.
Okay. All right. Listen, I got to say, GoToWebinar. I am learning you, and I apologize for.
Oh, it looks like we may have lost Ashley. I'm sure she'll join us back here soon. Let's turn to Michelle. Michelle, you also have been an early adopter of these regional efforts with the IEGO process. Tell us a little bit about what that consists of who are some of the stakeholders, and what do you all hope to accomplish in the Inland Empire at the end of the day?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we just learned, don't say anything about GoToWebinar. It's gonna get back at you, Ish. Let's get Ashley back in the room soon. Thanks for having us. So I'm representing our executive committee, IEGO's executive committee, because we had just too many scheduling conflicts, but normally you would see one of our community leaders speaking on this more and more. I'm sort of stepping in, but the Community Foundation has been the host of IEGO now for almost 2 years. It is a bi-county inclusive economy network. We have over 45 members. Different economic contexts and conditions, but just echoing what Nick is saying, we have lower educational attainment, too many low-wage jobs for us in services and in logistics and warehousing. We have a young population. We have north of 65% people of color in our region, and we're growing. I mean, we are sort of on fire with growth. But several years ago, leaders came together and decided that we needed a regional strategy that would really maximize all of the assets in the region that we knew were performing and doing great things, but weren't necessarily working together, and harness those around some really good ideas, some growth sectors. We focus on advanced manufacturing, IT, cybersecurity, green technology and air emissions, and sustainable logistics. And we've really gone deep into sustainable logistics over the last year, because we've really had kind of 1 year, I would say, of solid governance and implementation for this effort. And we've been working very hard to build a truly regional and inclusive table while keeping the focus on economic development. So like others, the goal is to grow quality jobs with family sustaining wages and benefits and good working conditions. So our focus on sustainable logistics this year, we wrote an investment plan with different categories of investment. And now we're working on specific implementation areas, a lot in workforce and industry partnerships. And one thing that I think I want to bring up at this stage, there's so much evolution when you get people together and you truly are listening to different voices. I'm seeing so much more the intersection between economic and community development. And I think maybe COVID has sharpened that. You know, what do we really mean by equity, and what's the context and the conditions in which inequity is happening? So more nonprofits talking about getting into workforce development, more business leaders talking about housing, homelessness, and quality of life. And I think that's a tension that we see in our framework as we do stay focused on cluster development, but as we expand and we're authentically inclusive, that we're going to hold that tension going forward.
Great, thank you, Michelle. Ashley, welcome back. I want to turn it back over to you, give you a chance to tell us a little bit about Fresno Drive, how it came to be, where it's at, and you know what the coalition hopes to accomplish at the end of the day.
Yeah, thank you. And apologies, I am that person on technology today. So so I got it over with for everybody else on this panel. I'll be the one who can't work her tech today. Okay, Fresno Drive, developing the region's inclusive and vibrant economy. Honestly, I'll spare you the how did we even get to the moment where we launched Drive, because it's about a 20-year journey. And we don't have time with 2 or 3 minutes here, but I want to respond to what are the outcomes that we're expecting to come from this work. And I'll say in 2019, when we gathered just a huge group of people around multiple tables in a big banquet room in downtown Fresno, in anticipation of the Economic Summit later this year, and in recognition of all of these big pieces of work that were starting to move forward, but seemed to be a little bit disconnected. So that was the impetus for bringing these folks together. We went about our work with was a little unusual for the community development space, in that we imposed this investment plan framework on the discussion. And it kind of helped us land and root and go from conceptual to like, okay, these are great concepts, but how would we make them a reality? And the discipline of figuring out how to attract and deploy capital really allowed our sort of community development group to move forward and get very concrete. So it was an investment plan frame. We had, you know, the economists come along and say, well, gosh, if you spent $4 billion in Fresno over the next 10 years in this big portfolio of initiatives that you're talking about doing, you're going to see some really tangible outcomes. And we started to see big numbers, like almost 50,000 jobs created, 14,000 affordable housing units created or preserved, 64,000 workers trained, 3,500 small businesses supported. So we all kind of went, oh yeah, those things, we want those things. Well, that was 2019. And of course, we still want those things in 2021, but we have continued down this road of what does it really mean to be inclusive, and how do we put the inclusive in inclusive economic development? And as we did that, and Ish has been right in the middle of all of this on our Drive Executive Committee, we spent 2020 really digging in on our theory of change and our race equity plan. And what happened as we did that is we went from numbers, we want these numbers, to it's not so much about what happens as it is how do we get there. And I'll say just a little bit more about that, and then I'll hand back to you, Ish. So it's not unusual to have communities thinking about big scale citywide workforce development programs or cluster, you know, all of the stuff, right? There's nothing super different or interesting about the portfolio items that we have in the Drive portfolio. They're unique to Fresno. They reflect our ambitions as a community, but none of it would surprise you. But the way we're going about doing it is this. Number one, we're changing who the customer is of our community's economic development, infrastructure, and work. So for years, the customer, in my experience, has always been the business. The business is the customer. They're already here. Boy, they're here for a reason. What do they need to grow and expand? And then we work to get community and public infrastructure to align to support the expansion of that business and that business's customer. We're changing that to say the customer now is the person from the historically marginalized community. What is it that that person needs to access the economic opportunity that's already here, and working backwards from there? And of course, it means aligning with things that are supportive and helpful of our business community and as they expand as well. So that's been a really significant thing, number one. Number two, we talk about radical coordination with Drive. For us, Drive is like the network of networks. We had already in place several collective impact tables, like our 0 to 5 group was working really well. We had the other end of the continuum, cradle to career continuum working, like we had all of these pretty large interdisciplinary tables. We basically scooped them all up. So now the housing folks are sitting next to the early childhood folks who are sitting next to the entrepreneurship folks who are sitting next to the university-based research folks, et cetera. And it's this amazing big grab and coordination of all these pieces. And then lastly, the scale that we're looking at for Drive, like the scale of intervention, both in terms of, you know, the individuals impacted all the way up to the dollar amounts, like those different levels are things that we've not done before. So the result of that, we think, is actually the most significant part of Drive. Our North Star, instead of saying our North Star is 50,000, you know, net new jobs, although that's clearly an outcome that we're working to help support. But our North Star is economic growth in Fresno that's based on transformed infrastructure and systems that enable historically excluded BIPOC communities to prosper. So the focus is on the infrastructure and the systems. You know, and I'll end with this. I think when I started in the Drive journey, I thought, you know, just give us a whole bunch of money, quality execution across this portfolio, we're going to see sustained change. And what we have now added to that is like, yeah, that's a really big part of this. But if we're not focused on the system change in the long term, that $4 billion will ultimately get circulated through the system. We'll see some outcomes, but we'll be back to the same place where we are today. And that's what we want to avoid. So that's the Drive story.
Great, thank you, Ashley. Let me turn it over to Tim. Tim, introduce us all to the work that's taking place in the Salinas Valley. You know, you bring a very additional critical vantage point of being really close to the residents and the community organizations that represent the intended beneficiaries of the work that's been launched there. Tell us a little bit about what's going on there and what you're hearing from the community in terms of what the outcome should be.
Sure, thanks, Ish, and it's good, it's appropriate to follow Ashley on this, because in the Salinas Valley, with the work we're doing around inclusive economic development, we've really been inspired by the work of Drive and hope to implement a similar approach to economic development that really centers racial and economic equity and has a component to it that involves real genuine community engagement. I think the most important thing that has come out of the process in the Salinas Valley is this recognition that to do community engagement in a real way takes time. I mean, it takes time and it takes patience. It's some of the civil rights organizers used to talk about slow and respectful work, and that's what real engagement looks like. It can't be fit into a short-term timeline just to meet a certain deadline or date. I mean, it really is this ongoing thing, and to really organize it correctly, we needed an appropriate timeline. And so we worked together with local leaders and MBEP and others through the process to extend the timeline to do community engagement and really shift how we're thinking about the outcomes on this to make sure we could hear from residents and have residents really shape the direction of economic development. So basically, for the last 6 months, what we've been organizing to really listen to the concerns and the needs of residents is something we call a Civic Academy strategy. And a Civic Academy is a tool we use in organizing when we're trying to focus in on a particular issue, a particular area, but we really want to hear from people, and we really want to surface talent. We want to find leaders in the community who want to work for change. And so the way it works is we organize a meeting in a community-based institution, a church, a family resource center, or a local school, a nonprofit organization, and work with those local residents to run a meeting, 30, 40, 50, 100 people, that involves some teaching. And so in this case, residents were teaching each other about economic trends, teaching each other about some of the local data around the economy, around housing, around wages, around jobs, around racial equity, and then turning to residents and asking them to share their own stories and experiences around that. How does that sync up with what they're living? What is going on in this community around the economy, around family budgets, around some of the obstacles to economic advancement? And so hearing those stories and experiences, but most importantly from that is providing opportunities for next steps to people who want to work to change some of those trends, to be part of making a difference on it, so that there's some opportunity for new leaders to emerge who are going to work for that change in the future. So far to date, we've had Civic Academies with just right around 500 people across the Salinas Valley, from King City up to Castroville. And the other night, we held an evaluation meeting coming out of those Civic Academies, inviting people to participate, to evaluate what happened, what they heard, what the next steps would be. We had 51 people from those 500 come back and say they wanted to be leaders who would work on economic development in their communities. So those leaders right now are organizing to be able to sustain that and to sustain their involvement in shaping economic development going forward, and also recognizing that this is a critical moment right now. A lot of their conversations have exposed gaps and problems and impediments to economic development in the Salinas Valley. So they want to address that, but they also know that there's an opportunity to shape a vision, really a forward-looking vision for what the economy in the Salinas Valley could look like. The Salinas Valley is home to an incredibly hardworking and talented community. It is a large proportion in Monterey County of immigrants, recent migrants to the community who essentially have taken risk, economic risk, personal risk to try to advance themselves economically, to try to make things happen for their family. There's an incredible economic opportunity in that, in human capital. So to have real economic development, we don't just need physical or financial capital, we need human capital, and it's all right there in the Salinas Valley. But there's a lot of impediments to those residents really advancing themselves, being able to take risks, to be entrepreneurial, to seek economic mobility for themselves, for their families. And we've got to remove those barriers to really unlock the human capital that exists in the Salinas Valley.
Great. Thank you so much, Tim. Nick, I'm interested in hearing a little bit from you, and then we'll go to Michelle about what this genuine community engagement process has or should look like in Kern County, and especially in a way where it centers on the racial economic equity that Tim alluded to. What's it been like in Kern County with your effort?
Well, I mean, I think one of the challenges that we've had, and I think the folks in Salinas have kind of had the same one, is that, we got up and going right as the pandemic hit. And so to, mimic the true kind of outreach that we've seen in other areas was really difficult for us, but we've tried really hard. I think, one of the things that's incredibly important is that, I know that, being the Chamber of Commerce, we're kind of seen as the establishment. We have a great partner who is co-moving this forward with us. I hate to say co-leading because it really is the communities, and that's our community foundation. And so, we have kind of moved together to try to work with as many constituencies as possible, and to try to set that discussion table in a way that really brings as many voices as possible. So, I mean, we're really proud of the fact that we have social justice, we have environmental groups, we have labor, all at the table with traditional industry, government, and it is not perfect. I know we even have stakeholders who are probably viewers to this webinar. I don't want to oversell what our outreach or what our outcomes have been to date, because it's a constant work in progress. And I think, one of the most important things, and one of the things that's been, important for us, is that we do have, and we are going to have, issues that we disagree on. And so what I've really tried to do in terms of my role within B3K, and I know others have tried to do the same in order to come to this table, is kind of compartmentalize those disagreements and really try to find that, it's like that 80-20 rule, that 80% that we do agree on. Everyone agrees that we want everyone in this community, in this region, to have opportunity. How do we make that happen in practice? And how can we rally around some areas where we all agree? But it's incredibly important, given the farm worker community that we have, with being a large agriculture, and that's very true across all the regions you have represented here, that we're reaching into the farm worker community. We do have a situation in Kern County where we don't just have a racial or socioeconomic equity issue, we have a geographic equity issue. We are an 8,000 square mile county. We are bigger than some states, and we have a mountain ridge that cuts right through us. And so we need to make sure that we're engaging everyone throughout this county, whether it is, the metro area of Bakersfield to the outlying communities of your Arvins, Delanos, to our Eastern Kern partners, the folks who have a totally different economy over there, one based on mining and aerospace and defense installations. So, I mean, what we've really tried to do is be as authentic as possible and inviting the most diverse and really trying to have conversations and address issues in a way where we're talking about the things that we can agree on, and that we can all be committed to changing and working to advance that change.
Great, thank you, Nick. Michelle, I'm going to integrate this element of community engagement to this third question that I want to have you and Ashley briefly respond to. Given the recommendations that are surfacing in the investment plans that are being brought forth by these different regional efforts, how do we see those things affecting or influencing public policy and the private sector in ways that are necessary to deliver the needed racial and economic equity we're all seeking? What does that look like in the Inland Empire?
The investment plan that we've sort of say for sustainable logistics, and I think there's something every region is unique, size, economic history, racial history. It's important that we really understand those local contexts, and I think that so the investment plan that we're putting forward with sustainable logistics, just by naming air quality and environmental justice, creates the space. So I think that the investment plans themselves, written by a core team of people, vetted by many more people, right? It's the transparency process so that other people can see into what you're thinking. And the thinking isn't held by a very limited number of leaders. This is the power sharing part, right? It's not, don't just come to the table and tell us what you think. Come to the table and let's work on stuff together. And if you think this statement is important, it's going to make it into the investment plan because your voice actually matters and you're going to shape this with us. And then we're going to work together on things, right? We're going to jointly raise funds and we're going to deploy those funds to people who haven't normally had them or haven't been invited to these kinds of tables. So I think we did a lot in the writing of the Sustainable Logistics Investment Plan to center, I mean, I'm not going to pretend, like, you got to center the people who know the work also, right? So there's higher education and there are, businesses and there are these, green tech experts, and you want them leaning into this because they understand where this sector is going. But then how is it real to people on the ground? And I think checking your own assumptions, I'll say that, I'll be polite about it, is a pretty critical part of the process, and being willing to change and modify. And I think we're all talking about doing economic development very differently. And we're stepping into it, like making mistakes as we go. Yeah, Nick, I was thinking, like, we don't really yet have EJ and labor at the table in the way that we need, but the other thing that we're doing is making sure that we keep those lines of communication open, the door is open, and we're going to their tables. Because in a region this big, we have to go to other people's tables as well. So IEGO really has to work as a network, as a flexible network, to bring kind of the knowledge and the wisdom in, not to kind of hold it or control it. And that's been a learning for us. Does that get at it?
Yeah, thank you, Michelle. Ashley, how about you in the greater Fresno area? Same question, how do these investment plans, bring forth the reforms we want to see in policy changes and the partnerships with the private sector?
Well, I think I have such mixed feelings about the policy arena, because clearly there is, no doubt there's a place for policy change as a major tool in this overall effort. But I also have seen a number of us have rushed to policy without dealing with culture, without dealing with really public sentiment. And you got to marinate in this stuff a lot. And when that happens, as we all know, having worked I'll own it myself, having worked in local government, I can give you all kinds of examples of really poorly implemented policies that got absolutely nothing done. And yet the policies were enacted with the best of intentions. And so we are recognizing that it's both and to Tim's point, the continuous and meaningful community engagement is really the center point of the culture and therefore the policy change. And I feel like we're just starting that in Fresno, you know, and it's taken us 20 years to get to this moment where we have the capacity and the willingness to, at citywide scale, stop and say, we're changing who's in the room, we're changing who's being listened to, we're changing whose voice is guiding us. And we know that there are going to be a lot of policy changes that are going to be needed as a result of that input and that influence, but like you just gotta create space for that. So I think for us, like there'll probably be some low-hanging fruit and some early wins that we go after, but I just feel like I don't want to celebrate that as like, woohoo, we're done, because this is about whole heart, whole mind, community-wide change in Fresno, which, you know, unfortunately is among the most racially exclusive large cities in all of America. So this is like, I don't know, it's going to take us a while. So I think it would be unwise to put it out there as like, oh, policy changes, we're done. Let's not do that, you know?
Got it. Thank you, Ashley. And I do want to give Tim, I want you to have a chance to also chime in on this question of the work that's occurring right now in the Salinas Valley. How do we make sure that the outcomes have the potential to influence policy that affects the constituents in your region and maybe inspires you know, behavior changes in the different sectors within the region as well?
Thanks, Ish. Yeah, and I want to maybe circle back to what Michelle was saying earlier, which I think was a really important point, is that to do that genuinely means to really recognize what people are saying is important to them and what matters and what is needed in these communities. There can be there's a role for data, there's a role for studies, there's a role for you know, very smart, well-educated people to have ideas for what's needed in a place. But that if we're serious about, you know, engaging people and hearing what they think about the economy, then we've got to respect that and put that above what the data might say about what's needed or what a study might show would be best for economic development. If that's not what families and working people are saying they need, then it's probably wrong. You know, it's probably off by a little bit. It's probably missing something. And so to really elevate that local expertise, I mean, and nobody knows better about how California's housing crisis than somebody who's struggling to pay rent every month, or nobody knows about the need for advanced skills in workers and somebody who's struggling in a low-wage job. And so to really elevate that expertise in these conversations above, you know, other sources of expertise that also matter, it becomes important. The other thing I just want to point out too is that I think the ongoing process to really implement this, there's a really important role for the civic sector to be engaged in shaping economic development, and that's incumbent back on organizations like ours and community-based organizations that can build enough power to be recognized by and at the table with leaders from the private sector, leaders from government, to help shape these conversations. That the economy, it doesn't exist for itself. The economy exists for people. And so as citizens of this country, this place, these communities, it's incumbent on us to really shape what type of economy we would like to have, what's best for us. It's not just this kind of ideology of just that you let it go and it'll solve everybody's problems. We get to decide what we want the economy to look like, but it's incumbent on civic sector institutions and organizations to really shape that, because the values of civic sector institutions are going to be slightly different from the values of government or the values of the market-based institutions, and that's appropriate that the values are different, but they matter in those conversations so that we can hold all those things in tension. The values of a CFO or the values of a government bureaucrat can be held in tension with the values of a grandmother or a pastor or a neighborhood resident.
Great, thank you, Tim. I'm sorry, go ahead, Michelle.
I just wanted something that's happening. The Irvine Foundation has funded a lot of this work, and a lot of this work in the Inland Empire and the Inland Economic Growth and Opportunity Initiative, which started like 4 or 5 years ago and has been like changing, morphing. But they also funded this incredible project in San Bernardino called Just San Bernardino, which is 10 power building organizations focused on that city to build what's called the People's Plan for an Inclusive Economy. So it really aligns with what Tim is talking about, and it is building the capacity of those organizations to intersect with other tables that generally are the tables around economic development. And I just want to flag that as another example, because in the Inland Empire, there's lots going on. And we got to like connect all our tables over here, but just affirming that.
Great, thank you, Michelle. I'm gonna thank you all for your responses to those questions. I'm gonna take one or two questions that have come in from the audience. I think we definitely have time for one. If there's time for a second, we'll do that. But let me start with this first question. Came in from David Abel. Wants to know a little bit about with regards to high-speed rail and this recent adoption of the South Coast Air Quality Management District's indirect source rule. Maybe Michelle, we start with you on the latter half of that question. How does this affect the economic prospects of your regions?
Well, it depends on who you talk to. So what's really, really important about this, I think for IEGO, for the table that we have and that we're growing, we started a learning lab and we we brought in Tim Rainey to talk about what are high road jobs, because there's confusion among the business community, right? Like, are we all on the same page with this? We also talked about a big project called the Colton Intermodal Rail Yard, which has the community of Colton very frustrated, the environmental community frustrated, but also our CTA, San Bernardino CTA, and many people kind of coming out against it. Big job, potentially a big job creator. But the issue is like, can we talk about it? And that's incredibly challenging in the world today. And so the indirect source rule, that is potentially, according to industry, a big job loss for the region, for the environmental community. Very much cleaner air. We want cleaner air. And yet IEGO is focused on green technology and air quality emissions. And we've got the California Air Resources Board relocating into Riverside. We have, incredible technology at UCR. Can we all get on the same page about what are the potential solutions that we can accelerate, and where are the jobs going to be for people who need those jobs and can move up a career ladder in that sector? Can that sector become a real cluster? So we're going to learn about this. We're going to talk about it. We have an executive committee for IEGO today. It's going to be on the agenda because we need to talk about it. But I think our work is really, where's the space where we're going to learn about it together, and whose voices, to Tim's point, gets elevated as we talk about the solutions. There's got to be some ways that we do a little horse trading with this so that we're moving forward. But that's my answer for the moment.
Great, thank you, Michelle. And Nick or Ashley, I think we have time for one of you to take on that first half of the question, the high-speed rail development. How does that affect either one of your communities? It's a regional project, obviously, that has implications on both your communities. So who wants to take a shot at responding to that?
I vote Nick.
Okay. I was going to vote Ashley. No, I mean, it's an opportunity, and I think that that's the way that we see it. I mean, I think, regardless of your opinions about high-speed rail, I mean, it appears, and with the expected Biden infrastructure plan, it appears like, this is going to be a project that is built in some format. And so I think, what we all are all focused on in the Valley, you're getting the most investment in construction at the moment, is making sure that whatever happens is a net benefit to our communities, both from an economic standpoint and then just from a community development standpoint, that we're not splitting communities by developing this piece of infrastructure and potentially, exacerbating some of the issues. I just wanted to add one thing, if I could, that I didn't get to add, and I think it's important to what kind of Michelle said about the Irvine Foundation and ties into the Assembly members' comments about AB 106. Resources are so important to this work. All of us, I mean, we're not funded by Irvine, but most of us have used the Brookings Institution or have utilized California Forward as a resource. I mean, resources are so important to this work. We could not move it forward without the support that we have, either from those thought partners. I know it's, was Brookings, McKinsey, other consultancies who come in and really helped us. And I mean, that's why the support of those outside voices is so important to these efforts. It really helps us, shape the debate, and those of us who are in the regions and in the work and in some of our, kind of frames of how things have always been, help shake it up. So I mean, I just really appreciate California Forward, the Stewardship Network, the learnings from the other regions, the connections with the funders and the thought partners like the Brookings Institution, because without them, I mean, we'd be totally dead in the water.
Great, thank you, Nick. Well, that's a really great segue into the next part of our program. But before I turn it back over to Micah, I want to just take a second to thank each of you for your time today and your continued partnership with not just California Forward, but our extended network. We're all very grateful for the work that you're doing in your regions, and we are here to continue to support you. So if everybody could just join me in giving a virtual applause for our panel here, thank you so much. Micah, back over to you.
Thanks, Ish. Thanks so much, members of the panel. So excited that, Nick and Michelle, you're part of the California Stewardship Network. And Ashley, I couldn't possibly be more excited that you're the incoming co-chair of California Forward. So thank you so much for all the work that you're, doing in the communities. And, one of the things I'm really sitting with is like the acting with an urgent slowness, right? That like so many people need this change to happen, but you can't impose it on the community, which means you need to really take your time to do the community engagement right. And so that's something that takes a lot of resources. And these resources primarily have been provided actually by private foundations. And so we wanted to, bring in Dana Becerra. She's the president of the Heron Foundation. And they have been generous funders of a lot of this work. And something that I am embarrassed that I didn't know about you until I prepared to do this presentation is that you are actually from the San Joaquin Valley. And your family had a dairy farm there. And so, this is, I think, a very felt commitment for you and Heron beyond just a wonderful thing to do. So would love to hear a little bit more about, Heron's commitment to this and why it's important for philanthropy to be involved.
Yep, great. And thank you, Micah and Ish and Team California Forward for inviting me. You're totally stealing my thunder on outing me as a Valley native. First of all, I just really want to honor being in the company of so many people who are committed to supporting the ingenuity and collective agency of communities. It's deeply important work to me personally and professionally, and I'll do my best this afternoon, for me at least, to be brief. Before I do that, though, as Micah already alluded to, before I put my philanthropy and my professional hat on entirely, I do want to share that this is not just professionally relevant for me and for Heron, but it is really deeply personal to me. As Micah said, I grew up in Lemoore. My family had a dairy. We grew all the commodities for the dairy, and we had a commercial cotton operation. And along with all four of my brothers, we figured out recently that we have either attended or worked with 2 UCs and all 23 of the CSU campuses. And I still sit on economic advisory councils for Cal Poly San Luis Obispo. My father was a county supervisor in the Valley when I was growing up. And one of my brothers these days is a very busy water lawyer out of Sacramento. When I think about it now, and when I talk about my work at Heron, what I learned most from my experience growing up in the Valley was a bone deep belief in the capacity of communities to self-organize for change. Just in my lived experience in the Valley, whether it was stumbling forward as a community after the bankruptcy of a local creamery, or the resilience of residents after wildfires, for me it happened to be in San Diego, the collective agency of communities is a powerful, powerful force. So putting on my professional hat for a moment, at Heron, our mission is helping people and communities to help themselves. That's been true for the last 30 years. A little bit about us, and if I'm telling you things you know, please forgive me. We are a private foundation by legal structure. So at its absolute most basic, that means that we are an endowed organization. We are not a fundraising organization that has an obligation to distribute 5% of our assets annually in service to mission. I'm very happy to report that early on in our existence, our board came to believe that this was the silliest business model on the face of the planet. And they immediately asked the staff, and I quote, "Shouldn't we be more than a private investment company that uses excess cash flow for good?" At that point in time, they answered in the affirmative. And as a result, for nearly the last 25 years, our board has really championed the idea with staff that 100% of our assets should be in play for mission at all times. So not just grants, but the totality of our endowment as well. And what that means is we work comprehensively to reflect mission and community voice for us in all things that we do. In grant making for sure, but in public equity and private equity and venture capital, in our public debt, in our bond portfolios, all of it. And so for us, although it was initially our work in public equities that took us to the San Joaquin Valley, while we were working in the Valley, we encountered the DRIVE initiative. And based on what I've already said, you could probably imagine that for us, we see inclusive, multi-stakeholder, locally driven regional planning efforts as a key, frankly, demonstration of communities taking on their own agency to create change. And that is very exciting for us. From our perspective, when you have engaged citizens in a place working together, that's something that we believe we should get behind. We believe firmly that the best solutions come from those who are closest to the problems, who are most impacted. For us, innovative solutions need public and private support. They just do. All capital stacks tend to be a blend of different types of capital. And we believe, not shared by all of our colleagues, but we believe that as private foundations, we are best positioned to be society's risk capital. For us, we think risk needs to be flipped. We think that the challenges we're facing are urgent, that the time is now, and that for those of us in organized philanthropy, risk needs to be looked at through the lens of inaction. What is the risk we are imparting on communities by failing to act and to distribute assets? For us on our best day, we think that we must hold power accountably. But for us, at least at Heron, today and every day moving forward, we must learn to share power equitably, and ultimately, we must transfer power entirely, permanently. That's our North Star. That's the path that we're on. It's the work we're doing in Fresno and the San Joaquin Valley and a handful of other places around the country. And we're eternally grateful to those who are doing, the doers of deeds, as we say at the office. It's important to support that work. We are very intellectually honest that we don't have or create impact. We fund those who create and have impact. And for us, all I can say again is thank you very much to the California Forward team for inviting Heron to be a part of this and to share our journey and perspective as we work together in this and hopefully future participatory processes.
Absolutely. Well, that's extremely inspiring, and a comment from Lenny Mendonça, nothing like growing up on a dairy farm in the Central Valley to make this work personal. So we have a lot of Central Valley dairy farmers that are leading the equitable economic recovery. And thank you so much for your commitment to this work. And I didn't actually know everything that you just shared about Heron, and I'm like extra inspired right now about how this isn't just a charitable endeavor for you, but it's how you think about your entire organization. I wish more thought the way that you did.
So do we.
We'll get there. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for having us, being here with us today, Dana, and your support of this work.
Gratitude. Thank you.
All right. So to close us out, we have Paul Granillo. Paul is longtime leader of the California Stewardship Network, Regional Steward of the Year from the California Economic Summit, and the chair of the California Forward Action Fund, the head of the Inland Empire Economic Partnership, and a former priest, which as came up in this conversation is almost sort of what we're doing here, right? Like, it's the difficult work of bringing people together, getting them out of their silos, getting them to believe that we can have a different set of outcomes for our regions, and working towards that. So Paul, give us our call to action, man.
And that we can do miracles together, right?
This work does sometimes feel miraculous.
It does, because this work is hard. So we need to thank our panelists today. I think you saw some great examples of work that's being done across the state. And as it's being done across the state, it also continues to be rooted in the regions. And every region is different. The players are different, the economy is different, But when we come at this as California Forward and the California Stewardship Network have, from the triple bottom line, understanding that an economy is a complex thing, that you need to have employers to make an economy work, and that we need to be inclusive. We need to be focused on equity and making sure that people have a seat at the table, and especially people who traditionally have not had that seat, and that we're all focused on the environment and making sure in this very real time of climate change that we are focused and making decisions that are trying to mitigate against that. So again, congratulations to all of our presenters today for the work that they are doing, because it is changing things for the better. We want to have a call to action. And as we emerge from COVID-19, as we're taking our masks off outside, as we know that stimulus dollars are flowing, we can't forget lessons learned this year. We have learned lessons, I hope, of the fragility of life, and we have to mourn the people that we've lost, the ones that are sick, and the families that have had to walk some terrible steps during this year. We have to have learned that we are connected. We are humanity connected to all others around the world, and that we need to care for one another. And we also need to, I hope, as a country, deal with the reality of racism that is embedded in so many of our social and economic structures. And we have to change that. We have to change that. My call to action for you all is to continue to learn, continue to partner. We thank Micah and his leadership of California Forward and the California Forward Board for being the place where we can come and have these conversations. At the beginning of today's webinar, you heard from Assemblyman Salas about AB 106. And we really need your help. We need your help to get AB 106 across the finish line. And so we need you to reach out to the chair of the Assembly Appropriations Committee, Lorena Gonzalez, and to Speaker Rendon by letter, email, and urge to their staff, urging their support for AB 106. You can reach out to Assemblymember Salas staff, Michael Dyer, or by using the Veronica Villalobos, who's a consultant for the California Forward Action Fund, and you can see that their contact information is there. So we need your help. We need them to hear from all parts of California, and we can get this done. So Micah, I'll turn it back to you.
Awesome. Thanks, Paul. And actually, while I have you, I've got a question for you,
Sure.
if that's okay. So you work with some of the biggest corporations in the entire world as a part of the Inland Empire Economic Partnership. And we've been talking a lot about engagement with the community. We've been talking about this as a public-private partnership. But if I could get you to riff on this a little bit, like talk to me about how to get genuine employer corporate engagement from small businesses, gigantic corporations in this work to really make it meaningful.
I would say that start with the premise that they're good people, okay? That they have shared interests, that many times they live in our regions, okay? And they share our goals. Too often we start at odds, and even in our framing. And I think that I know many corporate leaders that are trying to do their best when it comes to climate change, when they're trying to do their best about equity. But too often, they feel demonized before they even get to the table. And so I think that just starting from the premise that they want to be there, they want to help, and that they have often insights and knowledge that can be very helpful to these discussions. And over and over again, people have to understand that zero emission technology, it also is good for the bottom line, right? But we have to work to get there together because too many of the hope for goals, right, that we're all about,
Right.
the technology isn't here yet. And so we need to work together, as Michelle said, to create that technology, create those partnerships, and then go from there. So I'm not saying they're all great. I'm not saying that some of them aren't greedy, but I do think we got to start with the sense that they're not bad people.
Yeah, well, and there's no type of person where all of them are great, right? And I think a lot of what we do in society is, we lift up who we think are the worst actors, in whatever, group we want to be able to dislike, and we sort of paint everybody with that same brush. I actually love ending on this note, ending with there's a call to action around AB 106. Please contact your legislators. Please make this happen. I think it's going to happen. I was very excited with what Michael Tubbs said earlier on, little teaser there, hopefully. And thank you so much to Assemblymember Salas for being here and so many amazing leaders on the panel. But just ending with this, start with the assumption that other people are good people, right? I think actually is central to this work, and central to really building a movement where we get different outcomes, where it isn't, I think in California, of all places, we should understand it's not one political party that you like winning one more election that's going to deliver a more just and equitable world, right? It's harder work than that. As Michael Tubbs said, it's nerdy work, right? And as the panel said, it's slow work, right? We feel this terrible urgency. It's been so long that justice has been delayed, but that we can't jump over engagement with the community. We can't jump over the series of super hard conversations that have to go on, between these different actors that might have, even as Michael mentioned, even just the nonprofit community might have decades of bad feelings and various other things that they need to work through. So thank you so much for being here, Paul. Thank you so much to our wonderful audience. Please do join us in all of our work. Join us at the California Economic Summit. It's looking more and more like it's going to be in person in Monterey, November 9th and 10th. Support us on our website, and please do stay engaged through the newsletter if you haven't already joined us already. So we'll be coming back from time to time when we have fun webinar topics for folks. But this wraps up our first run, and really appreciate everybody's engagement, and I'll see everyone really soon, hopefully in person.